here tonight, and I'm going to introduce you to each one of them with a little bio. I'm going to start with Joanne Blicker, who is to my left. Joanne Blicker was one of the Schmidt's longest employees. She started working for them in the pottery shop in Vintage 1870 and continued working with them when they moved up the road to the French Laundry. There, as Sally wrote, Joanne cleaned, helped with the prep, and then donned her embroidered white apron to serve in the dining room. Byron Hoffman is the co-CEO / Chief Creative Officer at Offset, a wine commerce technology and brand design company. He's the grandson of Sally and Don Schmitt and the son of their oldest daughter and renowned floral designer, Kathy Hoffman, who's here tonight. He designed Sally's book, 6 California Kitchens. Cindy Paulson is one of Napa Valley's most beloved chefs. She founded Mustard's Grill, where, sorry, everything is delicious, in 1983, and continues to offer diners outstanding meals every day. Cindy has also partnered in the creation of more than a dozen of the Bay Area's most iconic restaurants and has written 5 cookbooks, including the James Beard Award-winning Mustard's Grill Napa Valley Cookbook. George Rothwell and his wife, Alice, owned the Antique Fair in Yountville for more than 30 years. He also owned and operated Bronco Janitorial, where his first client was Don Schmitt at Vintage 1870. George founded and led the Napa Valley Mustard Festival, which was credited for putting heads in beds during the Valley's slow season. Johnny Schmitt, Sally and Don's oldest son, he was one of the couple's earliest employees. Johnny worked in the couple's Napa Valley kitchens before striking out for France on his own and eventually moving to Boonville, where he first opened the Floodgate Café and then purchased the Boonville Hotel, where today he works with his nephew, Perry Hoffman, who's also here, and many of you probably know him from Etoile at Domaine Chandon, where he was the youngest chef to earn a Michelin star when he worked there. Janet Trefethen, who also I'm sure is familiar to all of you, and her husband John began growing grapes in 1968, just 1 year after Sally and Don moved to Yountville. Located a few miles south of town, the Trefethen Family Vineyards was established in 1973, and Janet, like other vintners, had a special relationship with the Schmitts, having collaborated with them during the winery's first 20 years, helping to set the standards for hospitality and food and wine programs here in Napa. Byron, I'm going to start with you. You designed your grandmother's cookbook, 6 California Kitchens. Can you start us off by reading her preface and telling us about your collaboration with her?
Absolutely. So here, I'll hold up the book quickly just so everybody can take a look. And I'll do my best. I'm not going to be able to reproduce Sally's voice, but I will try to read this clearly. My 6 kitchens. We all have a ladder to climb and then descend. We first learn, then achieve, and finally share what our lives have been all about. My ladder was made up of 6 kitchens, all of them in California. My first rung was my mother's kitchen. There I was taught the craft of cooking, which had been handed down through generations of my family. It was passed along to me with care and an emphasis on quality, and it was done gently with love. The second kitchen was my first commercial one. It was an established operation, but when I was abruptly thrust into it, I had to figure out how to make it work. So I used what I had learned in my mother's kitchen: quality, care, craft. On the next rung up the ladder, I had the chance to design my kitchen and really cook in it for the first time in my own restaurant, the Chutney Kitchen. I did it the way I wanted to, using what I'd learned, and learned much from doing it. When starting out, one never knows how high the ladder will reach. My husband, Don, and I reached the apex at the second restaurant we started together, the French Laundry, where we worked for 16 years. They were magnificent years, cooking for others, sharing food, creating a welcoming atmosphere, striving for quality. The steps down the ladder are about passing forth, sharing what one has learned and figured out. My years at the French Laundry were followed by 14 wonderful years of teaching in my 5th kitchen at the 30-acre apple farm we had purchased. It was a time of expanding our community and sharing the joy of cooking with hope, gentleness, and love. And then finally, in my 6th kitchen in the small cottage on the Northern California coast where we had retired. I didn't cook for others, I only cooked for Don and myself. I had to learn to cook for 2 again, which was a pleasure in itself. These were sublime years, and I wish they could have gone on forever. I'm actually now in my 7th kitchen, the one I have not counted. My beloved husband, Don, died several years ago, and I cook for just myself now. I am still surrounded by my family, friends, former students, and customers who all visit me. This matters. Now on the cusp of my 90th year, I live on the apple farm. I have a window I look out and can watch the change of seasons in the trees, the flowers, and the animals that pass by. I have a kitchen to cook in, and I have a desk for writing. It is the time that I do that, do what I have been thinking about for years, write down and share what I have learned, my recipes, my techniques, and my thoughts on cooking, quality and craft after working in my 6 kitchens. It is also my story of climbing up, then back down this glorious ladder. So maybe I'll just quickly give a little bit of background on the book project and then get into just my personal collaboration with Sally. So I worked with Sally on the book project for 10 years, which I didn't realize until the very, very end of it. And the book project preceded that. It was an idea in the 80s. Sally actually put together a book proposal with a great friend who was a photographer and submitted it to Chronicle Books, funny enough, which is the publisher of this book, and it was rejected for being too regional. So here we are, 6 California kitchens today. I love it. But, it was something that she always kind of kept in the back of her mind, but Sally was not someone that sought the spotlight in any way. So a book was not something that was, it was always just about cooking and being with the people around her versus, doing anything to, to really kind of put herself front and center in the world. But she made so much of a difference for so many people. And where the book project kind of started up again, it was kind of nearing her 80th birthday, and my mother, who's sitting in the front row, had the idea to really assemble all of her recipes that had been written down. She had been teaching for years in the Apple Farm kitchen, and there was countless recipes that were recorded, and we wanted to assemble all of those, put them in a beautiful package, and gift them to Sally just as a memento and reproduce it in a way where future generations of our family could have these recipes. That quickly kind of changed from there. I'm a graphic designer by trade, and I heard my mom's idea, and I thought it was fantastic. But then I thought, well, there's all of these stories that go along with the recipes. Like those need to be told as well. So on Sally's 80th birthday party, multiple members of our family stood up and really presented her with the idea of like, let's make this book real that you've talked about for so long. We want to be here to help you with this project. So we initiated that 10 years ago. So I'll kind of jump way forward to the tail end of the process, and this was, let's say, October of 2020, and where we were at in that stage is Sally had completely finished the manuscript, which is a huge undertaking approved by the publisher, and as a designer, I had to take that manuscript and put it into the first galley, so it's where the layout and the manuscript and all the photography that we'd done for years come together. So I did the first cut, and my plan was to drive up to the apple farm, stay with Sally for a week, and sit down with her for an hour every morning and go through it, get her edits, and then go back to a little room and work on it together. That's not what happened at all. Keep in mind, Sally was 88 at this time. We worked for 6 days straight, from 9 o'clock to 6:37, not even really taking a break for lunch. So, and we ended up just refining the design, the storytelling, photo selection together. And that's really what I emphasize, is that this book was a collaboration in every way. Sally is a fantastic writer, but we really put her in the driver's seat when it came to everything else as well. All of the photo shoots that were done. My brother Troyce did the photography. I kind of served as the creative director, but not really. My job was to kind of show Sally how to be the art director and how to style the photos and how to think about them, because we wanted really every part of what Sally did wasn't just the food, it was the atmosphere, it was the aesthetic, it was everything. And so we wanted her to be able to channel that as much as possible into every part of the book. So to see her work ethic at 88 or 89 come through like that was incredible.
Johnny, as Byron just said, your parents had strong work ethics. Can you talk about their upbringings, what their life was like in Fresno, and how their lives and their selves changed when they moved to Yountville?
Hi, everybody. I was in 5th or 6th grade when we left Fresno, 5th grade. Moved to Yountville schools in 5th grade, I guess. So I had, my upbringing in Fresno. I try to remember where we were. But I just remember my parents bought and remodeled houses. We were always living with sheetrock, and we'd finish it up before they sold it, kind of thing. But as I remember, don't touch the walls, move the bed away from the wall, kind of thing at the end of the Fresno house. But my mom would start projects, and my dad worked at the bank, and he would come home and have to finish the project. She would rip a wall out or want a door here or tear. We didn't have doors in our bedrooms because people would slam them. So all kids, we lived in a converted garage, the 3 older of us, and we would, she took the 4th wall out of all the rooms and opened out a playroom, and you couldn't slam any doors then. And so we lived in a very kind of a interesting situation that way. I don't think we really fit in Fresno too much, but they had some amazing friends, Hans Sump and Stan Bitters and Jean Ray Laurie, who are all artists in the Fresno community that I think they really bonded with really early on, way beyond my understanding at the time. I was too young other than to see these amazing civic projects that happened, and the birdhouses and the little tables and all the pottery things that came through the house. So their house, they always made a beautiful home. So as they were always entertaining among family and friends, but not really among the neighborhood, they kind of kept to themselves. So when we moved, for us, it was moving from a suburb and a Fig Garden Village, kind of a edge of Fresno, which I realize has no sidewalks. I went back a couple years ago and was driving through, and I thought, what's different about this town? It's still really kind of cool, even though it's Fresno, and which gets all kinds of problems of a reputation. And I realized there was no sidewalks, and I realized that's one of my dad's upbringing there, and why Yountville, he didn't want sidewalks in Yountville, and why they fought that, and why you have the railroad ties and the paths, and why Yountville still retains its character, I think has a lot to do with that. And I realized possibly his Fig Garden Village, I talked to friends who still live there, and they said, yeah, that's been a kind of a symbol of that neighborhood, and has never gentrified past that. It's still old family. So I think that was definitely, they had this aesthetic, they brought it to Yountville, and they just kind of jumped in with both feet. They got to work together, which was, I think, amazing. My dad used to go off the bank all day, and my mom was home with just the 5 of us, nothing to do. So she all of a sudden had a job. So we lived next door, the old house, the old vintage house, and it was an amazing time. We rode our bikes all over town while they worked, and show up at the cafe in time for a burger for dinner, and they were happily ensconced in building something that I don't think they really ever thought what it would become, or they just stuck their heads in there and got together people. And my dad would come to City Hall. I remember Terry screaming out the door, following my dad to City Hall, because he came so often that Terry, I remember having to hold her down one time to keep her from following my dad back to City Hall. We lived across the street, and it was a little 5-year-old running down the street trying to find, get dad not to go to City Hall again tonight. So he was very committed, to the point where I think it probably made my mom a little nuts sometime, the civic duty, but he loved it. And they backed each other up, and they built and they made beautiful, and they fed people, and ironically, that's sort of what I'm doing in Boonville. So anyway, so that's kind of a little bit more of the transition from Fresno to here was just a whole new chapter for them. And they met all kinds of incredible people here, creative people that made them who they are. So anyway.
George, what was your first impression of this young, dynamic couple when you first arrived in Yountville?
Well, I came in about 1970 with my family, and I just sold a janitorial business in Vallejo and Benicia. So I thought I'd just pick up where I left off and get a couple accounts. That didn't happen. One day, I was really in despair. I heard a knock on the door, and it was your dad. He wanted to talk to me. First, we talked about the kids, how they were doing. before he left, he says, George, I want you to start doing my work at the Vintage 1870. After that, everything came easy. I got Behringer's, I got Beaulieu, I got the City Hall. It was great. So thank you, Schmitts.
Janet, your relationship with Sally was not just a vintner-restaurateur relationship. Can you tell us about the cooking school and gardens at Trefethen and the role Sally played in them?
With pleasure. I just want to say that I have been here recently for a different event, and there was no way they could fill the room. It might have been a quarter full, and this is such a fabulous tribute, I think, to Sally and Don. It's to have all of you out there. It's, touches the heart. It's really fabulous to see. So I want to paint just a little picture for you, and I think that there's a lot of you out there that know what the color is and could probably paint the picture even better than I can. But I want to take you back a little bit, and I want you to come to the Napa Valley in 1968. And since I'm on the wine side, we're going to look both wine and culinary. And so in 1968, there were fewer than 25 wineries in the Napa Valley. Things were a little different. I could walk into any grocery store or any place with my boots and spurs on and nobody stared. And similarly, I think Andrei Telechev was about the only fellow in town that really was the true winemaker, wouldn't you say, Thomas? And knew what he was doing, and we all looked to him. And on the culinary side, I remember Vern's Copper Chimney and the Grapevine Inn, and, there wasn't much else. And it really, I think, reflected what was going on in the United States as well. Across the country, we were still kind of in the Spam and Jell-O salad mold days. And probably a lot more brown spirits than wine. I mean, it certainly, everybody thought we were nuts to be coming and thinking about revamping that old winery. And I think, to go back to the culinary side, then here comes Sally and Don Schmitt. And I think Sally really became our Andrei Telechev, so to speak, because she was always so gracious, always so welcoming, and at the time, as a vintner, if I wanted to host a writer or a trade person, there wasn't a great restaurant to take them to in the valley. We had to learn how to do it ourselves if we wanted to show our wine off to its best. And so a group of gals got together and started the Napa Valley cooking class and said, well, where are we going to host the first, where's this going to take place? We've got a brilliant idea, but how do we execute? Well, there was Sally and the Chutney Kitchen right across the street, and that was where the very first classes took place. And Sally taught us so much. She shared so much. So much of what I have in my cooking repertoire today, I know where it comes from. It's Sally. Do you remember those wonderful soups that she would make all the time? And the only difference was, okay, are you going to use squash, or are you going to use bell peppers, or wonderful fresh peas? But she laid the groundwork for all the basics. And at the same time, we all knew if we were going to a meeting and we just had our fingers crossed that Sally would be the caterer, because that was the only way you were going to get really good food. So the cooking class grew, and it didn't have a residence. It kind of wandered around. It was at Lila Yeager's one time, and so it ended up at Trefethen, and we had the pleasure of continuing the cooking class for over 20 years. And I think that, but Sally started all that. We couldn't have done it without her knowledge, her education, and her caring, and her giving. That was just so much a part of who she was, and always meant so very much to us, and just a tribute to her and all she's given to the culinary aspect of Napa Valley today.
Joanne, you began working with Sally and Don when they were running the Chutney Kitchen and Vintage 1870, or Vintage Café. How did you meet them, and what was it like working for them, or with them?
It was really great. Being at the Vintage in the early days was really cool. I worked with Patty at the storeroom in the back, and Terry and Eric would ride their bikes and throw stones and doing little wheelies, and I'd have to sweep it out 12 times a day. And it was fun. The kids were all about. Don was always opening the back door for you to come into the Vintage, and it was cool knowing them. They were very, very kind and gracious and generous. I'm not going to say as much as these other people have.
George, Sally and Don had the first espresso machine in Napa Valley. This speaks to their innovative spirit. What are your memories of other ways they impacted the emerging culinary and really the entire scene of Yountville?
Well, I'll tell you, that espresso machine said it all. It was expensive. When you walked into a place and they had that expensive machine up, you knew you were coming into a place that took care of their people. And that was what the Schmitts did. They were wonderful. They were innovators, and they did things outside the box. And it taught us that thinking outside the box was a good thing, not a bad thing. So again, we thank you. Schmitts.
Cindy, in the foreword of 6 California Kitchens, you wrote about a Sunset article that mentioned Sally. Was it a coincidence that you opened a restaurant in Yountville? Did she influence that at all? And how did you feel about writing the foreword for the woman who influenced your life as a chef 30 years later?
Well, to answer the last question first, I was completely blown away that I got to be a part of the book. I love Sally. And, I worked a lot, and we didn't get to spend a lot of time together, but our time was always really good. So it felt really wonderful. But I guess when I started out in the 70s to become a chef, you weren't supposed to do that if you were a woman. You could work in the pantry, you could work in the bake shop, and the chefs probably wanted to get into your pants more than anything else. Otherwise, why were you in the building? And then if anything broke in the kitchen, it was because there was woman juju in the kitchen. So it was kind of demoralizing because everyone kept saying, no, you can't be a chef. And I go, yes, I can. And they go, no, you can't. And my sister-in-law got a Sunset magazine when she was out visiting California, and there was this little picture in an herb garden of a woman, chef, Sally Schmitt. And I went, see, there's a woman, So I carried that picture in my wallet I think I got that probably in 68, and I met her in 83. So I said, Sally, and I was so nervous. She came into Mustard's. She and Donna, I was like, oh, God. God's in the restaurant. There was 2 scary gods. Julia Child came once, and Sally came, and they were equally terrifying to me. And I have no idea what I cooked. I have no idea at all. And I went out afterwards to see if I, had a chance or if I was done. And I had a chance, so it was really nice. And I told her the story, and she just burst out laughing. She said, oh, there's a lot of women chefs. I said, yeah, name them. But at that time, they were just starting. Alice was started, and Barbertrop and different people, and so it was kind of happening, but it was an interesting thing to have someone be your mentor that you didn't get to meet until you were where you wanted to be. But she's the one that got me there. So thank you, Schmitts.
All right, Janet, in Cindy's foreword, she mentions the wild parties that took place upstairs at the French Laundry. I know you have stories. Share one of your favorites or a couple with us, please.
Oh, dear. I could get myself into trouble, but maybe Cindy wants to ad-lib with me on this one. But the parties that I remember the best at the French Laundry were, there was a group, and we're a small handful of vintners. It's still a real great, tight community. And there were a number that had December birthdays. And so the group got together and said, all right, we're going to throw a party every December to celebrate everybody's birthday. And of course, it had to be at Sally and Don's. I think everybody kept their clothes on. As I recall, I don't remember, but just what I remember most, and not a specific story, but just that wonderful sharing of camaraderie and the sense of community. Everybody brought a bottle of wine, if not two, or magnums, and it was just, again, that sharing and having one heck of a lot of fun. And I've had the tendency to talk about Sally a lot, but I can't say enough for Don either, because you'd go to the restaurant and there he was, kind of, hey, welcome, it's so great to see you, and I mean, you'd feel so good, and then you could actually walk into the kitchen where Sally's cooking and, visit with her while she's firing up everything and putting great things on the table. From that, I got the experience of, I'd watch her, and she would pull out a drawer, and there was her flour. And she'd pull out another drawer, and there was her sugar. And we were working on designing our kitchen at the time, and so every time I bake, there Sally is, because I pull out my sugar drawer, I pull out my flour drawer, and it was all thanks to her. So, thank you, Schmitts.
Joanne, back to you. The first time we met, you told me about Perry working in the kitchen when he was a small boy and he'd roast peppers. What culinary techniques or life lessons did you learn from Sally and Don? And how did you feel about the sale of the French Laundry and their move to Philo?
Well, yeah, I think I learned every culinary thing from Sally, from roasting peppers to parting out ducks. I came from Maryland. I didn't know how to part out a duck or roast peppercorns or do any of that. So I learned so much from her. She was quite the mentor. Sorry. And when they were going to move to Philo, we were a little scared because we had a great paycheck. But we were so happy for them because they worked for so long to get up there. And it was a really peaceful place for them.
Cindy, you told me in an email that when Sally's book came out, you made a nice lunch for her. Can you tell us about that lunch and what you cooked and just what the mood was like?
Sure. This was right after the salad book was done. She actually had a few copies. And I luckily got to go up to the apple farm. And I thought, well, she's getting older. She's probably not eating huge amounts of food. Mistake. And not that they were huge, but she cleaned her plate. I was really impressed. And I was making it at home, and I was driving up 2 hours. And so I made a cold picnic. And then I made a kit to make miso soup when I got there. So I did a Japanese lunch. And I've never been a good pastry chef, so my husband, John Watanabe, made my favorite of his cookies, because he is a good pastry chef, a hazelnut and almond cookie that she loved. And we sat I thought I'd probably get a half an hour, 45 minutes with her. I think we were together 3 or 4 hours talking. Like, I'd just been there yesterday, and the conversation. She had that magic skill with me that I could see her for a couple times, then I wouldn't see her, and the conversation just kept going. It was wonderful. But I made her miso soup, peanut sesame noodles, and a little wakame salad. It was good. I was proud of myself. I was also terrified because if it hadn't been good, I would have been mud. She would have told me.
Johnny, did you move to Boonville before your parents, and what inspired you to follow in their footsteps and become a chef and restaurateur?
I wonder, at 64, I'm kind of wondering that myself, but I'm still doing it and loving it, so with the help of my nephew, Barry. So I think, obviously I'd watched or absorbed, I think we all absorbed my parents more than we actually knew we were absorbing. My kids all learned to cook. I didn't know they were learning how to cook. They sort of learned to cook by osmosis, I guess, because when they went off to college, they started calling me for recipes and things like that. But then, the next thing I knew, they were cooking. So I think it just kind of being around it so much just kind of rubbed off on all of us. And I think that had with them, that was a huge lesson for me. I went to France for over 3 seasons. I think I worked 3 harvests over there and cooked in a small village for a big, wonderful family chateau. And I got to cook and garden, and I was the au pair. Got to take the kids to Switzerland to ski and stuff. So I kind of learned a little bit of everything, and everything my parents had taught me came into focus. I got to actually do all these wonderful things I didn't know I knew how to do. Had run out of money, and my parents didn't have credit cards at that point, and I would have to go to American Express and wait for some money. So instead, I got a job and ended up staying off and on for 3 years. And I think that once I came home, I realized I almost got into business with some friends who now have a Paris wine bar, and his kids have taken it over now, Juvenil's in Paris. So I made great friends, and I kind of wanted to put roots down, but it was very difficult in another language. So it's hard enough to keep my motorcycle going and keep my work schedule going. So I came home, and my parents had, somewhere right in there, my parents had gone to Boonville, and my friends from France came over, cooked with us for a month, and my parents went to the Sea Ranch with the idea they'd buy a house on the coast. This was a lifelong dream. And so we all cooked at the French Laundry. I think it was the first time she stepped away from the stove and trusted us to cook with my friends from Paris, and the rest of the family all helped. And they went off, and they didn't find anything. They didn't find community, on the Sea Ranch or at Gualala, and they were driving home on Greenwood Road. There's a little sign for sale, and that was the apple farm. So they they bought it. I mean, they literally came home and said, we bought an apple farm. Somebody's got to go run it. So Karen and Tim went up, and they ended up, we all cleaned up the place. It was the rainiest year ever, and we were living in a little 14-foot trailer with Karen's 2 kids and a couple dogs and me and another friend. And while we mucked the place out and filled dumpsters with all kinds of horrible things that had been left. It was a farm labor camp at that point. So I started hanging out a little bit, and someone told me there was an ex-priest and a nun that had a bar up the road. And they showed, it sounded like it started a joke, but it was true. He was a Monsignor, Jerry Cox. He's passed away a couple years ago. And his wife and their 2 little girls were living in the back of this bar, a little loggers bar, and trying to do a deli and make a life, and it was not working very well. So I came in as a partner with Dr. Pickett, loaned me some money, and with absolutely no collateral. And I opened a restaurant rebuilt the whole thing into a little cafe, very much inspired by Cassandra at the diner, with breakfast and lunch and Mexican food on weekends. And it was an amazing success. It went really well, and we loved it. I met my then wife, the kid's mom there. She came in as a pastry chef, and then 3 years of that, and the hotel had been closed. Boonville Hotel had a notorious short run, a couple years, and we, as a joke, we knocked some plywood out of a window and crawled in and looked at it, and a friend who got a realtor license, we said, sure, we'll make an offer on it. So we made a very silly low offer, and they made a counteroffer that was still seemed kind of slowly low, and we all of a sudden were in escrow. And so we, just, it's, 34 years later, 35 years later, we're still there. We've almost lost it many times. It's almost killed us. And but I gotta say, it's going better than ever now. And my parents I'd go to them in tears. We'd be out of money, we'd be out of water, we'd be out of something. And my parents were always there to just reassure me that, yes, it's okay to feel that way. Yes, it's okay to be, totally exhausted and tired. But isn't it great? So they never ever said, oh, just sell it. And, my mom always said, it's not done with you yet, obviously, or something else would have happened. Somebody would have come along and bought it, or we put it up for sale twice, and one guy died in the middle of escrow, and it never really, it just did happen, and so we're still here. So they taught us tenacity.
Can you tell us about your style of cooking and how that was influenced by your parents?
Well, thanks to Perry, I don't cook at the hotel anymore, which I miss, but I was influenced by, obviously my mom taught me the basics, just incredible basics. And I remember when I came home from France, I brought them to France. They had never been to France, so they came to visit me when I was living there. And I got to show them, we had a 2-week trip through France where I took them to all my crazy favorite restaurants and that my friends and I were going to. And it was kind of the start of Nouvelle cuisine and things like that. And of course I was young and impressionable and hanging out with British people who were very into that whole thing. And she came home, and when I came to work with her, I finally kind of came home from France and ended up working with her for quite a while to try to help her, give her a little break. And I tried all these little things, oh, you ever done this, or you ever done that? And she kind of looked at me and said, when you have your restaurant, you can do it that way. I did. But by the time I got to where I did my restaurant, I realized she was so often right that the simple, basic stuff she taught us was great. And of course, then we had Cassandra and, so many amazing people here in the Valley doing food that, of course, I emulated a lot of stuff, stole a lot of stuff from Cindy and all kinds of people. And we wrote a new menu every day, and that's what Perry's still doing. And he's way more ambitious than I am and younger. And so, but it comes back to that thing of kind of running it by the seat of your pants and learning as you go. And so I don't think we don't really have a style other than kind of what we learned because of the environment we grew up in, which was so important. So, that's it.
Thank you. Byron, I wrote in almost all the pictures in the book, but I think it's really all of the pictures of the book. Your grandparents are smiling, and your grandmother is laughing in many of the pictures. What were meals like when your family gathered together, and were they always that happy?
Well, first I'll give the caveat that, remember I told the story of I sat down with Sally for 7 days and she had her edit of all the photos. So she made sure that, no photo of her not smiling, made it into the book. So I just want to correct the record there. And I'm her grandson and I love her, so I wanted her to look good. So, but what are family gatherings like for us, for our family? Actually, probably not what you would think. I think that especially when people don't really know the family, but just know a little bit about the history. I think they picture us sitting down for these multi-course dinners, and it's fairly formal. It couldn't be farther from the truth. Really, what happens is we spend most of the time cooking together. And more often than not, we never even get to the table. So we cook together and usually eat half the meal or more standing up. And as a result, our family does not have the best table manners. we all really, really like food, and and Sally made sure everything was tasty, and anybody else cooking, I think, has been able to reproduce that, and we fight over it, and there's never enough. So yeah.
And there's a lot of you.
There's a lot.
Well, I'm glad I didn't bring my teenage son. He might have been, that'd be a good argument for him. Tell us about your grandfather's cooking, though. I read that he was a griller, so tell us more about that.
Yeah, I can get into that. So of course he was known for, if anything needed to be grilled or barbecued, like that was Don's job, and that went, back to the French Laundry, where he, let's say if there was a piece of lamb that needed to be grilled, like that was, the kitchen job that he would do. But my personal memories of Don, he loved eating meat that wasn't cooked. So if there was, of course, like if it was steak, he would just, walk in and slice himself a piece and just eat it raw, throw some salt on it. I have a distinct memory of actually, we were experimenting with turkey burgers, and I was responsible for kind of mixing up the ground turkey and bacon, and he came in and just grabbed a handful, put some salt on it, and ate it. So he really, really liked his raw meat. I can't emphasize that enough. And he was also the resident expert when it came to mashed potatoes. So that was the dish that Sally could not touch. She was not allowed. And the grandchildren were allowed to try. We were his mashers, but he was quality control. He would come by, and usually it needed more butter, more cream, more mashing. It took a long time to produce these mashed potatoes.
That's awesome. Cindy, do you remember the first thing that Sally made for you, or can you tell us about a memorable meal that you had either with her or that she cooked for you?
Well, I remember my first meal at the French Laundry, and it was, I don't remember the first course, but it was lamb shank for the main course. And it was apple something for dessert. And I thought, okay, that's a perfect combination in life. And Don came over and helped me. I was like, what? It was probably 19, I came here in 79, so it was probably somewhere in 80. And I didn't go in the kitchen and talk to her because I wasn't about to do that. And Don came to the table to ask me if I wanted wine, and I was like, yes, sir. Kind of like, yeah, of course, whatever you recommend. So it was really fun. I went with a girlfriend. It was nice. We had a good night. But I was way too scared to, talk to anybody.
Well, if she was here today, what would you say to her? Would you still be afraid?
Not afraid of her at all. She made me really, that was one of the wonderful things about her. She made everybody really comfortable. I remember that first time I went to the table and talked to her, and I was so nervous for the first 5 minutes, and then she became one of my best friends. And just like that, she had that magic, genuine, suck you right into her life. And she was opinionated, and she had her ways of doing things, but she had a reason behind why, so you learned from her. So that was really fun. And she had an incredible sense of humor. She could call a spade a spade. She knew when something wasn't right. So it was fun.
Thank you. Joanne, tell me about your friendship with Johnny, and because the Schmitts have obviously brought a lot of people together. Tell me about your friendship.
Well, the apple farm would always have parties, and so we always all kept in touch. We'd get together at those times for weddings and parties, and Johnny's wonderful, and maybe not my favorite because they're all my favorites. But anyway, yeah, it was easy. You always knew you were going to, get lots of hugs and great food, and yeah, it was really easy to be friends with all of them. Oh yeah, and then I'm going to let you do that because that's going to make me cry.
Joanne has a big, let me jump in here if that's okay. Joanne has a big Joanne has purchased, she and her husband, Stefan, have purchased the elk house, did from my mom when she was still alive, which was the most incredible transition of one of my mom's favorite places, my mom and dad's favorite places, and Joanne now has it and shares it and uses it with her kids and her grandchildren and is carrying on, and it still feels like my mom's place and my mom and dad's house that my dad lovingly carved out of a piece of crap on the side of a hill and hand built and dug a foundation under, much like he did the White House. And it was their last project, really, I guess, of that, other than remodeling their house at the farm. So Joanne has now carried on an amazing legacy, and we still get to go over and spend the night in Elk, be around my mom's things. She sold it with everything in it, and yet it's even better than ever. It's Elk 2.0. So thank you, Joanne, for carrying on something that we couldn't really maintain, and this is fantastic. So thank you.
Something I just wanted to add there. Johnny mentioned that the Elk House was really just a shack before Don and Sally got a hold of it. I think that was definitely a theme in their entire life. They loved a project, and I think a lot of people knew them for the places that they created. When they were farther along, the French Laundry, many aspects of Yountville they helped transform. But the places that they made special weren't special to a lot of people's eyes when they first saw them. So they had this real sense of how to take something that had great bones and a lot of potential, and they loved the process of transforming it. Like, they really were project people. And when they got close to finishing a project, I mean, I was a little kid when they sold the French Laundry, but my sense is that was partly because they had made this beautiful place, and now they wanted to make another beautiful place. And they were addicted to working hard. They wanted to start a new project that was what was difficult. It was just who they were as people.
On that note, Johnny, on the phone you told me about how your father built out the apple farm for your family to live there and to be there. Can you talk about that, how he created a legacy at the apple farm as he had everywhere else?
Yeah, I'll try to. The apple farm, when they bought it, it was a mess. It's like 30-something acres along the river. Had incredible potential, but it was a beautiful piece of property, but the buildings were shambles, and but he had this vision. He found out he was incredibly patient with councils and things like that, which I'm not. And he spent quietly, unbeknownst to us in some ways, he spent almost 10 years, and I deal with the menacing kind of building planning a lot now, and not my favorite thing, but he patiently found out there was 5, maybe 6, there were 5 legal parcels, and he carefully made sure that every one of those parcels was perked, septic water perked, had access, could be deeded separately. And he didn't tell us he didn't have no expectations of any of us to do anything. Karen and Tim were the main forces behind the project, obviously on the ground, but he always left it out there that there are these parcels. And Perry now ended up building his house. He got a 2.5 acre or a 4 acre parcel on the farm, built a house. He beat me to it. He started after me and got in before me. I'm still working on our house, and with my brother Eric. And so we all have, and then now Rita and Jersey, my niece and nephew, who are the young people, they're the young generation who are now doing the farming of the apples, and Sophia. And then Polly. There are places now for 5 families to live on the farm, 5 or 6 different compounds. And if he could see it now, he somehow knew this was going to happen, but none of us did. And he never pressured us or expected anything from us to commit to anything. He quietly made that opportunity, and when it came along, they said, sure, we can talk about that. And whoever kind of wanted to do that kind of did that, and we've all had our kind of part in it. So it was an amazing legacy that they left behind, was this ability, number one, for all of us to see their vision and be part of it and live it, And now we all are living together. When my mom was alive very recently, we had 4 generations living there, I believe. So it was, it's kind of astounding. We all get along pretty well, and we all are creative. We all love building, and everybody in the family jumps in and with ideas and times, and we all join to eat. So share a garden and share the river, and so anyway, it's been an amazing opportunity for all of us to. He left us the possibility here, which was a lot of us would never have been able to afford a piece of property at this point in Anderson Valley. So it's kind of beautiful. So thank you, Don. Thank you for all his hard work.
So in a few minutes, we're going to open it up for Q&A, but before we do, I was wondering if each of you would just go from one end of the table to the other and just tell us a favorite story. It can be about anything about the Schmitts, a story that you know about them, a story that you were part of, just something that you'll think of whenever you think of them. Janet, do you want to start?
Just gracious hospitality. That's what they were renowned for, and Sally always smiling, always in a skirt, very rarely in pants. That's the way I remember her. And Dawn with an apron on and just very welcoming and charming.
They put fun into eating out. One night at the Chutney Kitchen, you guys might remember this. After the meal, music started. Fritz Dillsaber jumped up on a table and started doing some kind of jig up there. Ray Rector started edging them on, do more. Pretty soon there was a Congo line going, and we just Congo line all through that place, through the kitchen. Had the best time of our life. Thank you for that wonderful night.
Well, there's so many memories, but one of my most recent ones was Asa, her great-grandson, right? So Asa came over while we were having lunch. Well, he was brought over while we were having lunch by his grandma. And it was just, I took a whole series of pictures of Asa and Sally. And they were just both like grinning from ear to ear. And they have that genetic thing, and you could tell that was a grandma or a great-grandma and a grandson. So that was just a real treasure, because in the last couple years, I've actually become a grandmother. So that was kind of, you know, it's a cool thing. You think it's something you do when you're really old, and you never feel that old, but it happens anyway.
So I'll actually, since I worked with Sally for so long, helping her share many, many memories of this book, I actually wanted to focus on my grandfather, Don, for a moment. When I started this project, 10 years ago, I spent a lot of time with them at their little cottage on the Mendocino coast, and really got to spend time with my grandfather as an adult. And I was really just kind of starting a business at the time, and actually working with a lot of wineries in the Napa Valley, and just it was to talk to him about business was so interesting, because he always came back to the people involved. He just really, really cared about people, and he cared about communities. And to hear him also talk about his time, working on the master plan for Yountville, and collaborating with Florence Halperin, who was involved in Sea Ranch. I mean, my grandfather Don was really this quiet force, and he never bragged about anything that he did. If I think about Sally and Don, like Sally created these incredible spaces that pulled people in and made people feel welcomed. And then, Don, of course, was a huge part of that too. He was the host, at the French Laundry, but he really went out into the community, and he nurtured other people and helped them build their businesses. And then went even a step beyond that and thought about, well, what can the town do to further help them? So I think that that pairing of Sally kind of creating her own world that pulled people in, and then him kind of going out to the world was really special. They were just an incredible team.
I think for my probably one thing I remember most coming back, we'd gone to France with my parents the second time. I believe, I can't remember who all went, but a bunch of us went back to my old boss, and we got hosted and feted, and had these amazing trips. And by the time we got, my mom was not a big traveler, and she hadn't traveled much. She'd been out of the country until we took her to Mexico a couple times. Then she ended up going to Europe with us. She hadn't traveled, and yet she was an armchair traveler. She read everything, out there, and so knew a lot and was very well versed. But we were driving back. The airport was, the plane was late. We were getting in late. We had been on a flight from France. She was probably exhausted. I'm trying to think what age she was at this point. It was like 19, I don't even remember, maybe mid-80s. And we'd had this amazing trip, but she turned to me as we turned on Highway 128 out of Cloverdale, and we turned up the highway. She said, that was really fun, and that was great, and I'm so glad I went the 2 times we went. But quite honestly, I'm so happy to be getting back to Boonville and Philo and my house, and I don't really need to do that again. And, I thought she was kind of silly, and I thought, well, that's kind of, but I got to admit, the last couple of years, I'm beginning to think I might start to agree with her at some point after a few more airport experiences. And, we live in a beautiful place. It's kind of hard to leave such a beautiful place when you create, we have a great place to live. We have a great job. We have great friends. We have a great family. It's kind of hard to leave that for an airport and a couple of weeks that are fantastic, but we're all so lucky. We all live in an amazing part of the world. We've all been very lucky through this last couple of years of COVID and everything else. It's kind of amazing. We're all still able to do things like this and enjoy beautiful food and beautiful surroundings. It's all important to all of us, obviously. And they taught us, my parents taught me that, and it's true in every part of the world. People do this. I think America is the ones that lost it early on. We kind of got far away from that, whereas other countries have celebrated the table. They kind of never lost that tradition. I think for some reason we have, and now we realize how important it is to us. So they helped us. My parents kind of helped me understand how important that was, and respect what I've got. How lucky I am. Thank you.
I think I have 2 stories, one about Don and Tucker. Tucker was someone who worked at the laundry that was hysterical. He did dishes and he cleaned, and every time he cleaned, he'd find a cork behind the door. And he'd move it, and he'd go, God damn it, Don's testing me to see if I'm cleaning behind the doors. And Don would come by and say, where's my cork? When the door flies open, it's going to stop it and not run into, you're not going to break the glass. So they did this for about a year until they finally figured out from each other that Tucker was way more paranoid than Don was. But anyway, he thought he was being tested. And then the other thing that was funny that would happen about once a year maybe, the health inspector would come. And Sally left all the windows open at the French Laundry, and the guy would come and he'd be so like, your windows are open. You don't have screens on the windows. The flies are coming in. She goes, no, the windows are open. The flies are going out. And he would just shake his head and walk off and never cited her for it. But anyway, that was cool.
Thank you all. This has been amazing. And now I am not going to ask another question. I'm going to turn it over to our audience. And please, anybody who wants to ask a question of any of the family or of any of the panelists, please do so. And we can get you a mic if you'd like it.
So I'm part of the Rothwell family, and I was just wondering if there's any parcels left because we would like to join the compound.
This is probably a question for Johnny more than anyone, but I was fortunate enough to drink a great old bottle of Stag's Leap wine cellars with Don and Sally some years ago. And I'm just kind of curious if your dad loved wine before he moved to Napa Valley, or was it any part of the driving force to move here, or did he drink wine even in Fresno days?
as a little kid, my dad would fix us wine coolers, a little 7-Up, and a little wine. I guess that's not probably proper these days, but he would fix us just a little splash of wine and 7-Up or ginger ale. And while he fixed the adults all a cocktail, they were big into cocktails. I remember him rocking back in his director's chair on the lawn, which then would sometimes collapse, but he always would land. He'd always land with his drink upright, and. So they, I think they drink beer, cocktails, and they definitely drink wine. The wine at the Chutney Kitchen and at the cafe was C.K. Mondavi Chablis and Hardy Burgundy, I believe. And we had to decant it. I was like 14, and we had to take these gallons and decant them into fifth wine bottles, and it was just one of those morning jobs that you really didn't want to have to smell this stuff. It's not that it was bad. It's just that as a 14-year-old kid, pouring wine, sloshing wine through a funnel over the counter into these bottles was kind of I learned later to appreciate them a lot, but so I think they learned. The vintners taught them to love fine wine. My parents didn't have the money or the wherewithal to know, what a Chablis was. I mean, they knew what it was, but they probably didn't really, I'm sure they never drank very much fine wine until they got to Napa Valley and learned from all the vintners here. So that was definitely that was a learned thing. My dad was obviously soaked it up like a sponge and loved it. And he just talked to all the vendors and said, what do you want me to have? And that's the way we approached the list at the hotel. We go to the vendors and what do you want to see on the list? What do you want to drink? What do you want your friends to drink when they come in? That's kind of now Perry's wife, Kristen, is doing the list at the hotel and doing an amazing job. And she approaches it the same way. She talks to people and finds out what do people love and what do they want to see on the list when they come. And I think we all learn from each other, so thank you. I learned more about their courtship. My mom dated my uncle, who was 6 years older when she went to Davis. She was 16 years old when she went to Davis, kind of the youngest student there, and she dated this guy who was 6 years older than my dad, so 9 years older than her. When he found out how old she was, he dumped her for the roommate and married her, and at the wedding she met my dad. And they had a great time, went to an after party apparently, and just agreed they both had this great time and went away, and she went back to Davis and he went to Berkeley where he was a student there. And he drove to Davis and left a note on her, a letter to her, a note saying how much he loved meeting her and wanted to get together with her again on her dorm doorstep. So Davis must have been a little smaller then. So, but it was, the stories, it's a great summary in the book about that. And, I learned a lot about my parents from the book, stuff they told Byron that I didn't know, so.
It's been a really touching event. I didn't expect to get emotional, just sitting here. And it's been inspiring as well. It feels like I didn't know Sally and Don almost at all. I have family members who did, and they really love the challenge. They really love working, and so I'm wondering, maybe for the panelists who have been sort of reliving these experiences, I imagine it's been emotional for you as well. For the family here, what's the next project?
I guess the mic got handed to me, so I've got to figure it out on the spot. So there are, there's the Apple Farm, there's the Boonva Hotel. There has been, some interest and discussion around, could there be another book that is attached to those places? But we're not far along in any of that, so that's one of many projects. If you went just to the Apple Farm, for example, you would see too many projects. So there's always projects going on, like in the Schmitt family. We just can't help ourselves. And oftentimes, like they're not finished quickly because we started another project while we're already working on 10 others. But I think, Joni, anything you want to?
There's so many projects and so little time, and we kind of looked at my dad. I always feel like maybe I didn't do as good a job in Boonville as my dad did in Yountville as far as getting involved in civic projects. Although I dragged in recently on a beautified Boonville project, which turned into a shitstorm with Caltrans and other things, and I'm not very good at dealing with bureaucracy. So I sometimes wish I had him so I could lean it over to him and say, Dad, will you take care of these people, please? Because I'm going to kill them. So, how did you ever get anything done? And so he was just very patient, and he would sit and talk to the most jaded person and convince them that it was a good idea. And he heard them, he listened, and he heard them. And I was kind of think back, and that's, I'm constantly learning that. So we're just constantly, come to Boonville, where there's lots of things going on. And then, of course, Melissa and Eric are doing their building in their store here. And, everybody is, with Perry's carrying on. I hope he moves the Boonville Hotel and making babies, yeah. We're repopulating the schools in Boonville right now. So there's around 9 babies in our little group this year. So we're repopulating the schools. That's our current project. So anyway. Thank you. Thanks to everybody. I can't believe that you guys showed up for this, and thank you for everyone who put it together. It's an incredible tribute. It's just, you kind of forget they're just your parents. You take them for granted, and they were amazing, but we didn't know everybody else. So many other people cared. It really is heartening to see, so thank you for that.
So, this is the part of the program where we turn this all over to you. Many of you have stories similar to what the panel has, or maybe not as close to the Schmitts. Maybe you knew them in business, maybe you knew them personally, but if they have touched your life, then we would like to have you stand up and share that with us and share it with the family.
I don't know if I'll be able to get through this as well as Johnny and some of the others, but I'm Lee Richardson and have lived in Yountville since about 1977 or 78. And I live here because I was cutting Sally's hair in Napa. And Sally came in one day and said, I want all my service people in Yountville, and we have a place for you. And who could turn that down? So I came up to Yountville, and Don and Sally made me welcome and helped me to start a business. And I've lived here ever since. My wife Pam lives here, and she changed my life. And I think that's true of a lot of people. We've heard a lot of that. And I think another comment is for Johnny. I watched you make an omelet one time at the hotel, and you may not think you have patience, but you do.
Hi, my name is this on? My name is Kay Frame, and I was a partner in the diner for many years. And come down here. As a back-to-the-land hippie, I rarely went to Yountville during the early 70s. We were pretty busy up on Dry Creek Road, growing gardens, milking cows, raising chickens, and enjoying the country lifestyle. I had retired from running the food service at the San Francisco Art Institute and then managed the Calvine Nursery on Whitehall Lane in the early 70s. One of my commune pals, Paul Garton, I'm sure many people remember, mentioned he'd seen a for lease sign in the window of the vacant Greyhound Diner in Yountville. My restaurant soul sparked, and after a couple of months, negotiating within the Atwoods, it was mine to run. We were young and optimistic, and I gathered up some Calvine friends, Nikki Hamilton and Anita Brambrink, to begin the renovation. It took 9 months of daily labor, paying the princely sum of $2 an hour, to get everything cleared, built, rehabbed, painted, plastered, and primed. We installed a spacious redwood deck and redwood benches, and soon there was a striped awning and a new sign, "The Diner, Legendary Food." So where are Don and Sally in this? Don was the mayor at the time and dropped by frequently to check on our progress and cheer us on. His older kids were part of the Diner gang, and we spent many hours in Sally's Vintage Café, eating shopkeeper specials and drinking the excellent coffee. Both the Schmitts and the Diner had a big common thread. We all worked together like a family with long relationships and occasionally traded staff. Sally's Chutney Kitchen was a fancy place to eat in town, especially the Friday night dinners. The Schmitt set a very high bar for businesses in Yountville, creating an ambiance of California graciousness in every nook of the vintage 1870. Sally's restaurants provided excellent food and a gracious ambience. Their spirits were contagious, and the quality of their work and lives inspired us all. My restaurant started slowly a bit before Robert Mondavi's and Margaret Beaver's intense publicity efforts made the Valley world famous. But Don and his pal Steve Bartisono were easy, regular patrons and brought a lot of business our way. Eventually, we counted winemakers, vineyardists, ranchers, and the whole working community of the Napa Valley amongst our regular customers. Don took the role of the benign godfather, always interested and amused by what the hippies were doing. Don and Sally's concept of the French Laundry was original and far-sighted. The very idea that you could book a dinner and stay for the whole evening was unheard of. And Don encouraged folks to wander between courses, enjoy the beautiful garden, and even go into the kitchen to visit with Sally. The kitchen looked like something out of a magazine, colorful and airy with unique handmade pottery on display. There was a distinct lack of chef's whites and stainless steel appliances. Sally wore her bright dresses protected by an always blue bib apron. Many of my generation got educated at Sally's hearth. We learned what delicious food tasted like and how to cook it, how to be professional and yet authentic, and how to project the welcoming atmosphere Don and Sally created that brought people back time and time again. Sally was a unique food professional, born, not formally trained, having been brought up close to the land and knowing instinctively what was delicious and ready to cook that day. She prepared fairly simple and straightforward cuisine, but it was usually the best you'd ever tasted. Sally was famous for saying, "There's practically nothing that's not better with butter and cream." If there was a crown made for the founder of California cuisine, Sally would be wearing it. I was one whose life was made better by living in Yountville and thriving under the influence of the Schmitts. They transformed our little town from a slightly seedy place to the bright star of the Napa Valley and ultimately the world. They created the setting and food befitting the classic California life, emphasizing good taste, graciousness, and warm hospitality. My own career was elevated by inhabiting the same town as the Schmitts, and I will forever remember them with deep fondness and gratitude.
I have a lot of memories of Sally. The first one was in 1980. I had just graduated from college and got an advertising job that paid, I think it was $300 a month. And I had to go out in the community, and Yountville was my territory, and go into the community and meet people and sell them advertising in a brand new magazine that had zero cred to it. And George and Alice were some of my first advertisers, and Sally and Don had the Vintage Café and Chutney Kitchen and several other businesses in Vintage 1870 bought ads. And then Sally, we interviewed her for the second magazine, and her beautiful face was the full magazine. The first magazine had Vintage 1870 with balloons, and the second magazine, it was Napa Valley magazine, it was the first picture color magazine in the Valley, and it was her full face, and it may be framed somewhere in her memories. But I was lucky enough 11 years later to start managing 1870 like they had, and took over a lot of their quality assurances and customer service and welcoming. And as we were clearing the big old greenhouse that used to be on the property for the Villaggio Hotel, we found an old cutting board. And the cutting board had these very deep grooves in it. And we brought it out, and Heidi Reckdahl, who's Heidi Strong now, her dad had a jewelry store inside Vintage 1870, and she was a friend of mine. And she said, I know what that cutting board is. That was Sally and Carol. And they sat there and cut and cut and cut and cut. And that's why there's these deep grooves. So it's still at Vintage 1870. We brought it out. We made a display with Sally and Carol's pictures, and countless people have looked at that cutting board over the years. So hoping to get it back in the hands of the Schmitt family. But she was so gracious to somebody that had no business doing what I was doing at the time.
I'm Chuck Mybuyer, and 40 years ago, as a really, really young lawyer, I was lucky enough to be hired by Dickinson, Peatman, and Fogarty, come up from San Francisco. And they introduced me to a wonderful life, wonderful clients, the Trefethen family, the Rombauers, and the great names in the wine industry. They introduced me to great wines and great food. And of course, Dickinson, Peatman, and Fogarty had a lot of its Christmas parties at the French Laundry. And I got to know Sally and Don through that, and she was so generous. I'd go to her when I was in a nonprofit organization, and of course she'd give me a donation, with the gift certificate, which was very, very valuable when you had an auction. One of the greatest things I ever did as a lawyer, I didn't know at the time, was as a very young lawyer, I wrote the partnership agreement for the apple farm. I was very young, so it wasn't a very good agreement. But it was a really wonderful partnership. So I didn't actually get over to the apple farm until about 3 weeks ago. After Sally passed, I realized I needed to make a pilgrimage. And I stayed in the Boonville Hotel and had paella from Perry, went out to the farm and wandered around a little bit. And it is just a wonderful thing. I was so sorry to see them leave the valley, but I was so happy to see where they had gone. And I love the family's connection with the valley still. It's a wonderful life you all have had. Thank you.
My name is Maureen, and I'm very humbly perched here. I came here in '77 with my husband, and we got married just after our arrival here from Napa. And Sally did she did all the beautiful food for our wedding reception in the Chutney Kitchen, in the big area there that was all brick, and it was a lot of room for music and a nice casual encounter with my friends. But all of you in your family at that time are sprinkled through my memories of my early time here. Johnny came to my house and taught me to make an omelet, all the way from how you clean the pan, to what kind of pan to use, how you clean it, what you do to the eggs. The special tip that I've never forgotten is a little bit of water. I've never failed in making an omelet. One of the tragedies is that I became allergic to eggs, and so but I can really make a good omelet. And I remember the zucchini soup. I've made her zucchini soup and now other vegetables for that kind of soup for many years. And the steak alla chicana was something that was a part of my cuisine for a long time. And Karen married one of my high school friends, and I've always enjoyed following the adventures of their lives. And Kathy and her beautiful flowers, and her husband, I learned that I don't need to put my compost through the ostracizer before I get it ready to put it in the yard. I can be a lot more casual. And Eric was a part of the building of our house. He came and he was in our home and in our complicated relationship and through much of the building. And I would run my hand over the framework of the house, and where I did also worked along beside of you, and I would remember some of the conversations and still think of you. Anyway, it's so nice to see you again and hear the stories of your life. And it was nice to see you again, Johnny, in Boonville when we all visited for Mike Langley's services. And anyway, you were such a big part of life here. And Terry, I always wanted to follow and find out what happened in your life. You were the most beautiful little girl, just full of spirit. And anyway, thank you.
With that, I have a story about Terry. We had Antique Fair, which was on the corner, and I would sit up on my stool overlooking the counter, and almost every other day I would get a visitor. And Terry would come in, and she was so cool. And she'd open up her hand to me, and she'd go, "Look at this." And there would be a lizard or some kind of bug. And I think she thought she was going to scare me, but I had 2 older brothers growing up. It didn't scare me. But I loved Terry. She was so cute.
First of all, it's a real pleasure to be able to stand here and represent our Yountville community. I think the word legacy has really been personified here tonight with the stories that have come to life from family members, from people that have been changed forever. It's really humbling for me to be able to stand here, especially given the history of Don and Sally and all of you. And so many of you out here that I kept hearing the oh yeahs, and I could see the nodding heads, and you've all been part of the legacy that is Yountville. And so this is exactly what makes Yountville so special. It's all of us together, the generations of people. And so what I'm, again, honored to do today, and we also have Tracy Crumpin here from Assemblymember Cecilia Aguiar-Curry's office and representing Senator Bill Dodd as well. We have some formal proclamations, certificates, because we want to really capture some of this history that we've been sharing live tonight so that you can have it, again, to pass on for generations. There's some similar things in the congressional record, but I think it's important that we know that Congressman Mike Thompson, and I'll read that in a moment, read into the congressional record that will be there forever about Don and Sally Schmitt. It's my privilege on behalf of the town council and our Yountville community today to read this proclamation honoring the Yountville legacy of Sally and Don Schmitt. Whereas in 1967, Sally and Don Schmitt, along with children Kathy, Karen, Johnny, Eric, and Terry, moved to Yountville after Don was hired to renovate the old abandoned Grossinger Winery buildings known as Vintage 1870. That same year, Sally opens her first Yountville kitchen, the Vintage Café. Whereas Sally opened her second Yountville kitchen in 1970 called Chutney Kitchen as part of the Vintage 1870 Retail Center. Whereas Don began his Yountville public service as a member of the town council in 1969. He went on to serve as Yountville's mayor from 1972 to 76 and remained on the council until 1982. Highlights of his town leadership included envisioning Yountville as a visitor destination, helping create the town's first general plan, facilitating the development of several residential neighborhoods, helping the town acquire a parcel of the California Veterans Home property that later became Veterans Memorial Park, advocating for the municipal wastewater treatment plant, and supporting the purchase of the original Yountville Elementary School and its renovation into Yountville Town Hall. Whereas in 1974, Don and Sally purchased the stone building on Washington Street that once housed a French steam laundry business and spent 4 years renovating it before opening Sally's third Yountville Kitchen, the French Laundry, in 1978. The restaurant quickly grew in popularity with Don in charge of wine service and Sally as chef, where she focused on simple, classic dishes made with fresh, local, and seasonal ingredients, a cooking style that would become known as California cuisine. Whereas after 2 decades owning and operating the popular restaurant enjoyed by locals and visitors alike, Sally and Don sold the business to Chef Thomas Keller in 1994, helping launch his acclaimed culinary career. They then moved to the Apple Farm in Philo, California, in Mendocino County, which they had purchased in 1984 with daughter Karen and her husband Tim Bates. Whereas after a period of active retirement, Don passed away in 2017. Sally died at the age of 90 in March of 2022. Whereas Sally and Don were true Yountvilleans who left an indelible mark on the history of Yountville and helped establish the town's reputation as the culinary capital of Napa Valley. In 2022, Sally's book, 6 California Kitchens, was published and featured stories and recipes from her 3 Yountville kitchens. Now, therefore, let it be resolved that I, John F. Dunbar, Mayor of the town of Yountville, on behalf of the town council and the entire Yountville community, recognize the service and contributions of Sally and Don Schmitt and honor their lasting legacy in Yountville, Napa Valley, and throughout the culinary world. So on behalf of the entire community of Yountville, I want to present this proclamation to all of you. Now I'd like to invite up Tracy Crumpin. Tracy.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. I'm Tracy Crumpin. Whoa! District Director with Assembly Member Cecilia Aguiar-Curry. I just want to say what a pleasure and an honor it's been to hear these stories. It's hard to put into words how much I've loved this evening and hearing about your folks. It's just been amazing. So on behalf of the California Legislature, we are presenting a certificate in memoriam honoring the lives of Sally and Don Schmitt. We express our deepest sympathy and memorialize Sally and Don Schmitt for their exemplary personal, professional, and civic achievements. Their dedication and commitment made the town of Yountville the heart of the Napa Valley. Thank you for sharing Don and Sally with us. Thank you. And now I'd like to...
There we're going. We're piling these things up. It's good that we have such a big family here to take all these. Somebody gets that one.
We have to build something for this.
Not another project. Oh, no. And believe me, the stories that we've been hearing, the living stories really are much more compelling. But as I was mentioning, we'd like to make sure that we have a historical record for all that has happened thanks to Don and Sally and all of you here in our community. So this is a congressional record from the House of Representatives dated June 27th, 2022, remarks of the Honorable Mike Thompson honoring Sally and Don Schmitt. And as I mentioned, there will be some similar facts in here, but I think it's important to know what is living in the congressional record. Madam Speaker, I rise today to honor our friends Sally and Don Schmitt in celebration of their outstanding contributions to our Yountville community. Born in Roseville, California, Sally graduated from the University of California, Davis with a degree in home economics. She went on to marry Don Schmitt, who attended the University of California, Berkeley. While attending Berkeley, Don joined officers training in the Air Force, where he served for several years. Sally and Don dedicated their working lives to the betterment of Yountville. In 1967, Don and Sally, along with their children, Kathy, Karen, Johnny, Eric, and Terry, Moved to Yountville after Don was hired to renovate the old abandoned Grossinger Winery buildings known as Vintage 1870. That same year, Sally opened her first Yountville kitchen, the Vintage Café. She then created Chutney Kitchen in 1970 and the French Laundry in 1978, each restaurant perfecting her unique approach to cooking. Sally created what is known as California cuisine and farm-to-table cuisine. Don's extraordinary vision for Yountville included increased tourism, new residential developments, water and sewer management, and general planning innovations while preserving the historic characteristics of the town. He began his public service as a member of the Yountville Town Council in 1969. Later, Don went on to serve as Yountville's mayor from 1972 to 76 and remained on the town council until 1982. Don demonstrated incredible leadership in Yountville over the years. He helped create the town's first general plan, facilitated the development of several residential neighborhoods, and helped Yountville acquire a parcel of the California Veterans Home property that later became Veterans Memorial Park. Sally and Don generously provided mentorship and valuable advice to fellow business owners, and to this day, they are admired and loved by all who knew or had been touched by them. Madam Speaker, it is evident that Sally and Don Schmitt worked tirelessly for the betterment of the Yountville community. Therefore, it is fitting and proper that we honor them today posthumously. Signed, Mike Thompson, Member of Congress.